Joining us now, we've got Dale Vince, founder of Ecotricity, which is a green energy supplier. And Duncan Simpson also joins us from the Taxpayers Alliance. Let's start with you, Dale. A lot of people watching this show will be worried about their bills rising. We know across England, Wales and Scotland, the price cap that currently operates is anyway going up 12% in October. But bills could go a lot higher than that, right?
No, actually, because the price cap won't allow it. The next time the price cap gets reviewed is the 1st of April. And the price rise that goes live on the 1st of October has been calculated for the increases since last April up until this point. So it's a historical thing. It doesn't take into account the recent market movement. And so it doesn't take away the problem. But suppliers aren't able to put up their price to customers with the price cap. That's a problem. And I just want to say as well, it's also fundamentally a failure to do the job properly. So the energy suppliers that are in trouble are the ones that have not hedged their power and gas going forwards. They've taken a gamble that the market price will continue to fall. It's been doing that for about 3 years. And right now they're losing that gamble because it's suddenly shot up. This is what's fundamentally wrong with our energy market at the moment. The 50 or 60 new entrants that are at risk now, not been doing the job properly, they've been allowed to come in with a pretty reckless business model, and that's now coming home to roost.
Duncan, from the Taxpayers Alliance, let me bring you in. Privatisation hasn't worked. We're all being ripped off. We may have to subsidise, as taxpayers, the energy companies anyway. Is it time to nationalise our energy supplies?
No, I don't think it is. As previously I was just saying, obviously there's much more competition within the market compared to when privatisation first occurred. I think the latest Ofgem figures show there's around about 40 companies which provide you with dual fuel, so gas and electricity tariffs. That's a big improvement from where we were a few years back. A very substantial portion of their cost for all energy suppliers is through the wholesale cost. So in other words, what is the market or the spot price of buying liquefied natural gas? That makes up around about a third of the total cost that you're going to be seeing in your gas and electricity bill. But of course, one element of why the prices are so expensive for all consumers across the country are two reasons driven by government policy. The first of this is the current tax system, so not just VAT that you're paying on your fuel, but various other green initiatives, warm home discounts and so on and so forth. That's particularly expensive. And you're looking at around about 20% of the cost of your fuel bill is because of that. The second element, of course, is what was introduced by Theresa May. One of the many dreadful legacies of that administration was the energy price cap, and that came into effect at the start of 2019. If you look at the data across the whole of the industry, it so happens that basically all energy companies, or rather the average profit across all energy companies in the UK has effectively disappeared. I mean, the margins were relatively small anyway in the first place, sort of hovered between about 3 and 5% in the preceding 5 years, rather. But lately, a lot of these companies, whether they are the biggest of the big six or some of these new entrants as well, they have by law effectively been restricted to the kind of revenue which they've been able to generate. And so therefore, some of the very expensive capital expenditure, which necessarily is a requirement in this industry, has been inhibited by virtue of government policy. So I think these twin issues are things which the government may well struggle to address in the next few days or coming months. But certainly this is something which they either shouldn't have introduced in the first place, or should have seen these kind of problems coming down the road by virtue of the decisions and mistakes which this administration and previous ones have made.
Dale, it's obviously quite a complex policy area here, but in the end, doesn't it come down to this? We've got a number of energy providers who are seeking bailouts, including Bulb, who I think are the fifth or sixth biggest energy provider. You've got other smaller companies that look as if they won't be able to carry on trading. Shouldn't then those customers with those electricity and gas providing companies, shouldn't they then be transferred to other providers in the industry? Their balances protected if they've paid up front for their energy bills, which lots and lots of people do. If we're going to have competition, then surely some electricity companies and gas companies have to fail in order for it to be a genuine market.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying. I think it was a very decent analysis just now from Duncan, was it? I think he got most of that right. The price cap is a fundamental problem. most businesses, when their costs go up, they put their prices up to protect themselves. Energy companies that fail to hedge, they can no longer do that. The other thing to say is that all of these new entrants pursued the same business model. They sold energy at a loss-making price in order to grow quickly and big. None of them have ever made any money before this happened. Bulb, you mentioned cumulative losses of £200 million to get to the size they're at today. So fundamentally, they've taken this risk, all of them, the 40 or 50 that are involved, and they've lost. They've lost the gamble. I don't think the public should pick up the cost of that at all. And you could see this as a Darwinian kind of event in the energy market that weeds out this bad practice. I think it never should have been allowed. We have a regulator. It's not a free-for-all market, or it shouldn't be. It should never have been allowed to happen in the first place.
Dale, I'm going to stick with you, if I may, and put the same point to you. We used to own our gas and electricity. Margaret Thatcher decided it would be better to privatise it. We were all told to tell Sid about the sell-off.
I remember that.
Dale, could it and should it be back in public hands again? Would that solve the problem of rising bills?
I think it's a really interesting question. You've got to bring into that question the fact that we need to change how we get our energy in order to fight the climate crisis. We've got to become 100% powered by renewable energy and dial down the fossil fuels to nothing. And I think we've got to do that in the next 10 years. If you look at the scale of the investment and the coordination that's required to achieve that, there's a good argument to say it's best done in public ownership. The problems we've seen since privatisation, we've been in the game for 25 years. We're Britain's oldest independent energy company. And the problems we see are that private interests are usually very short-term. It was public money that built the national grid in Britain and built our generating fleets, because public money takes a long-term view in the interest of the public. Private money does neither of those two things. And that's a fundamental problem. And right now, something essential to our country, to our economy, and to our people is in the hands of private companies seeking a quick buck. That is a problem.
Duncan Simpson, coming back to you, the Taxpayers Alliance, I'm pretty sure you're not going to support nationalisation of our energy providers. So let me put this to you. Do you think nuclear could be more of the solution in this country? Typically, a fifth of our energy comes from nuclear. A lot of our nuclear reactors are out of action at the moment. They're being maintained. They're being fixed up. The network of nuclear power stations in this country is very old and a bit rickety in some cases. But aren't now a lot of people who are interested in this net zero agenda acknowledging that there is an environmental case for nuclear power, given the ups and downs of the market for oil, for gas, and for various other fossil fuels, which are often in quite tricky parts of the world?
Yes, I think that's certainly part of the mix. I mean, obviously we've got this long-running saga at the Hinkley Point B proposed construction somewhere here in the south coast of England. Now, I think there's some agreement between EDF, which is a French company, potential involvement of Chinese technology as well, which has understandably delayed the construction of that project. But I think you're quite right. I think a lot of the government policy, at least outwardly, is not quite seeing the wood for the trees, and thinking about nuclear as part of the mix to get towards net zero seems perfectly viable. And don't forget, a lot of the other proposed policies from the government at the moment could be particularly punitive in households. For example, I mean, the abolition, or rather the prohibition on the sale of petrol and diesel cars in 9 years' time is pretty alarming. And obviously the infrastructure for electric cars will expand, the price of Teslas will fall as more new entrants enter the market and so forth. So that's one area which could well work to the consumer's benefit. But I think a lot of the policies which the government is currently pursuing are particularly heinously expensive. And as I was addressing earlier as well, the way that the tax system and currently treats a lot of the energy tariffs is already pretty punitive for a lot of households. So, yes, certainly, there's no particular reason why the government shouldn't be encouraging the construction of more nuclear power stations, if not directly building them themselves.
Dale, if around 1 in 10 people, 1 in 10 English households, live in fuel poverty at the moment, what is forecast to happen to the number of households that will be in fuel poverty if bills continue to rise, and you've got the universal credit cut looming too?
Yeah, I was going to say that universal credit cut itself is going to push 800,000 more people into poverty. I was reading yesterday. You've got 25% in electricity bills right now that are simply government taxes for social and environmental projects that should be funded from central taxation. These costs are being paid by people in fuel poverty. I think that's wrong. That should come off. I think when we talk about heinous costs of government policies, we can't say that without saying that nuclear is one of those heinous costs. The cost of Hinkley is 2.5 times the wholesale price of electricity. And if Sizewell C goes ahead, the cost of that for the 10-year build program would be lumped onto the nation's energy bills. We won't even have a single unit of energy from it. Nuclear is not part of the answer, not new nuclear. Just let's keep our old stuff running as long as we can. We've got to move away from it. It's always been a very expensive, very slow and late technology. Nothing to do with the Chinese. Hinkley is late because nuclear is always late.
Just staying with you, Dale, if I may. So it's your prediction that with the price cap going up 12% in October, just to be clear, you think that will be the limit of the increases in people's energy bills, or could that slip?
Well, only if the government chooses to let it slip. So right now, it's a matter of regulation in the energy market that a customer on a standard variable tariff has a limit on the price that they can pay, and that's been set for the 1st of October, and it's not attached to what's happening in the market now. Anybody with a fixed tariff, it'll just be a matter of when their tariff ends, but they normally end in October or in April. So there could be some people coming up for renewal this October that will get burned by this.
Duncan, you've explained that you're ideologically opposed to our energy being in public hands. I just want to ask you a practical question. If it was in public hands, do you think bills would be cheaper?
Compared to the current situation, the government could well legislate it to make it lower. But many of the issues which the other guest has just been talking about would nevertheless still be there. You would still have a very salami-sliced industry. You would necessarily see a decline in the willingness of nationalised or nationalised companies to invest in capital expenditure, which is obviously vast and essential to the maintenance of the network. And that's the real issue with nationalisation. And we see that across any number of industries which have moved from previously nationalised to privatised, the willingness of firms to actually put shareholder capital on the line to improve services is there, whereas that incentive fundamentally isn't there when it's bureaucrats sitting in Whitehall who can't, run a bath. So that's the real concern which I would have in this industry and any other if it were to be nationalised in the future.
And just finally, to Dale, we'll give the last word to you. We're discussing should we nationalise, renationalise our energy providers. Just in a nutshell, what have been the benefits of privatisation? We're not talking about the owners and the shareholders of the electricity providers themselves, though, as you say, many of them have made losses. How has privatisation been a good thing since it happened?
I think it's enabled a digitalisation of the customer experience and a modernisation of billing systems and that kind of stuff. It's enabled that, and I'm not sure it might have happened at the same speed in public ownership. And it has enabled a drop in price. The most immediate effect you could see in the couple of years after privatisation was that prices did drop, but they did so because there were wholesale redundancies, and the cost of those jobs was passed from those public companies onto the public purse through unemployment. Private money seeks efficiencies and seeks profit all of the time, but it does so on a short-term, selfish basis. And to say that publicly owned industries are not willing to invest is just silly. They have their budgets set for them by the government and they spend what they're able to spend. And Duncan advocated that we should have nuclear power in public ownership, but he's against public ownership of the energy industry. I can't square that.
I didn't say that, but
We'll come